gentlemen, welcome back again to the channel. Now this is part 2 of the massive eBay Army Man review. So we're going to continue off from where I left off. Originally I had these 3 videos talking about each of these sets for the previous video, but since my phone didn't have enough storage space, I just went ahead and just saved them for this part. So without further ado, we're going to move on from where we are from the last video and then moving on to the next subject, which is the sets and vehicles. So without further ado, let us move on. Here we have the Woodland Indians from the French and Indian War. So I only have the positions and poses that came with the set, and even though I ordered 2 of them, we're only going to be touring 1. So without further ado, let's continue. So the poses, we have a tribe's warrior here reloading his musket, as you can tell by the hand going into his pouch, which is very well detailed. And I like how he has like powder cartridges on his chest, which is very cool. Oops, didn't mean to smack him. Here we have a warrior with a club in his hand charging at the enemy, ready to pound or crush someone's skull. Over here we have a sharpshooter warrior, either aiming from above a platform or on the ground, taking a shot within the trees in the woods. Here we have another warrior who's reloading his musket, as you can tell by the hand on the left side, which is this hand right here. He's using a ramrod to shove a cartridge down or the bullet down into the barrel to be fired again, which I do appreciate the detail on these figures here. Then we have a warrior standing and shooting, which is really cool. And then we have a warrior who probably is the commander or the high war chief, ordering his men to stop or wait to strike upon the enemies. Now, a little fact about the Indians or the Native Americans that were around during this time period. There was a bunch of tribes located in the northeast and the very north, where Canada and all is. And the French and Indian War was technically one war here in America. This was the first actual war fought in America. It was a war between the French and English, because the French were building forts along British territory. The British told the French to not build territories there, and the French wanted to build territories there, and it led to a huge dispute. But not only because of, and even though this war was fought in America, there was also a bunch of other countries that were monarchies fighting each other, which was technically, if you really look at it, learn about it, is technically the First World War, but technically it wasn't that big of to be seen as a world war. But there was like many wars fought in different places, and this was during the 7 Years' War, which was a war about monarchies trying to gain territory and claims. The British and French in the Americas were trying to fight for their territories, to preserve the territories as well. And this was also the war when young George Washington, who was at the age of 22, was a colonel during this war, fighting for the British. Which, if you also haven't seen, there's a movie coming out on July 3rd of this year called Young Washington by Angel Studios, and I'm excited to see it, because that is the one movie talking about Washington before the American Revolution. It's basically like the origin story of Washington and how he became famous, sort of. But also the natives were basically split amongst each other. Some of the natives hated each other. There was different tribes that fought each other, and they would team up with whoever provided the most. The French provided most of the natives that lived from the plains and swamps from the south of Louisiana all the way up to most parts of Canada, but mostly like Wyoming or Chicago. They provided them with different weapons and stuff like that, and they were teaming up with the French. And even the British had some natives on their side that would also fight on their part during this war. One common tribe, I believe, I don't know if it's a real one, was the Mohican tribe, which were a group of natives that lived in the forests and the woods, and I believe that's what these are, but I'm not really sure. There's a bunch of like Native American tribes from history. I have to do a little bit more research, but I'm going to assume that these are the Mohicans. Now, we're going to move on to the next set. Okay, so here we have the Taliban army, and I have bought multiple versions, but like I said from the previous video, we're only touring one set, so they're all going to be the same, and I have different colors, but we're touring the burgundy or the reddish brown guys here. So for those of you who don't know, the Taliban are a notorious, infamous organization that were basically part of, but not fully part of, the war in Afghanistan. I don't know. Actually, I'm just not going to debate into it. I don't want to offend anybody, but this is the Taliban army. They're known as terrorists by some organizations of the world. But anyway, these are toy soldiers. We're not going to break down into the real thing. So let's just focus on the toy figures. So here we have an RPG guy. Very well detailed. Ready to take on any enemy tanks or vehicles. Next, we have a soldier armed with an AK-47 running across the field, or running to cover. We have a commanding officer armed with an AK-47 and maybe a Desert Eagle or a 1911 pistol or some kind of pistol that they may have captured from their enemy as a trophy, but he is leading his men into battle based on what the position and posing means. So basically he could be an officer or a organizer of certain attack. Here we have a Afghan we have a Taliban soldier armed with an AK-47 on the knee, probably taking cover and shooting. We have a standing Taliban soldier with an AK-47, and you can tell by the vest, he has his ammo pouches and everything on the bulletproof vest he's wearing. And we have another soldier that is appearing to be advancing or running across the field as well. So this is all of the Taliban set. Now we're going to move on to probably the Afghan tribesman set from Armies in Plastic. So let's move on to that. Okay, so before we tour this set, I did have some Afghan soldiers within the mixed lot I had from the Armies in Plastic mixed lot sets earlier. But this is the actual set that I have bought, so we have more variety of different poses of what the set would have looked like, despite the few that I have found in the random mixed bag. So, Afghan tribesmen were basically, as we all know, modern day Afghanistan, but before terrorist organizations and before the war of terror. These were once nomadic tribesmen that lived in the Middle East. Their enemies, their rivals, were imperial forces like Britain, Russia, and certain imperialistic forces. And they also were rivals and enemies to India at the time, because at the time, Pakistan and Afghanistan were once, even though they were separate tribes, they were once united and were part of a separate federation, and they wanted to put an end to the British rule in India, put an end in British occupation and Indian occupation of their territory. So that's when they would rise up against the Indians and the British and would fight them during the Battle of Saragari. Don't know what type of war would that be, but it is a real battle, real historic moment. So these are basically either 1890 to early 19th century tribesmen of Afghanistan and soldiers of Afghanistan. So the poses, we have a sniper on the ground with a flintlock musket, as you can hold on, I'll try and get a good view. As you can tell by the rifle he has and the thing pointing up, that's a flintlock musket, because at the time they only had flintlock muskets for flintlock weaponry. but they would take the modern weapons off their enemies and use them to their advantage. Here we have an officer with binoculars and a flintlock pistol. We have two variants of soldiers running across whatever grounds they are in the middle of to get to cover or advance upon the enemy. We also have a standing rifleman, but this guy is not using a musket. He's using a bolt action rifle that he had captured off of a dead British or Indian soldier. And we have very different variants of swordsmen here, armed with shields and swords to slash and gash their enemies that when charging into close combat. We have another soldier here, and he's using a flintlock musket or a cap lock. Actually, he's using a cap lock, yeah. A cap lock musket, and he's probably a sharpshooter or a soldier on the ground, kneeling and taking cover and shooting at the enemy. As I was saying before I got interrupted, actually there were technically 3 different types of swordsmen, and this is one of them right here. This is one of them right here. This one's raising his sword and shield, but basically you get the gist. They're all the same, but they're very unique and cool in their own way. So now, since we're probably going to have to cut this short, let's move on to the announcements.